Welcome back to the second hour of the show with no name for December 14th, 2012. I'm Bob Going with Gavin Murdoch and special guest, city historian Robert Van Hasseln, and director of or president or whatever of the Historic Amsterdam League. The league's got its annual project going, right?
Yeah, well, one of them. We seem to have a few, and I brought a copy for each of you, courtesy of Historic Amsterdam League.
Cool.
This is the second edition of the Amsterdam Icons calendar. Wildly successful last year. We sold out in 2012.
I hope you printed more this year.
We did.
Good.
And
you ended up with like the one in your trunk, right? That was about
actually,
all that was left
I ended
over.
up giving away my last copy. Then I realized there was one on the promotional display panel. That one actually ended up being the one that went into our files for future reference. But we actually made some improvements this time. It's got December 2012, so you can start out right away. You don't have to go to January to open it up.
St. Anne's Episcopal Church, December 2012. Nice picture from let's see. Well, it's still a dirt road, so I would say about 1900.
A little earlier, I think, because of the steeple is still is up there before they drop the top of it.
Oh.
So. The other improvement, and of course this is all Jerry Schneider's work, he picks the photographs, enhances them, improves them. And this year he was actually able, this is the first year this was actually not digitally produced, this was produced on a real printing press. So I think the quality was great last year, it's even better this year.
Did I ever tell you how I cleaned the rugs in that church?
No.
Watch the first hour of the show then.
Very good.
All right, I'll have to do that. Of course, it still includes all the, in addition to the regular, dates that you need to know, holidays and so on and so forth. It has the days from Amsterdam history on it.
Now here we go. I'm sorry we forgot to mention it last week, but Izzy Dembski's birthday was last Sunday. And a few other people. Cy Foltman's birthday was, when was that?
I don't think I have it on the calendar.
No, it's not on the calendar. It's December 5th, the day after the Amsterdam Bridge opened in 1822. That was the first bridge?
First bridge, yeah.
Wow. Now, December 16th, this is an interesting one. The Mohawk Mills Chorus appears on NBC TV. I think the Walter Elwood Museum may have a film of that appearance.
Really?
We never got a chance. We found it in a box, and it's labeled as the Mohawk TV show, and it's in 16 millimeter. And at the time, we didn't have a 16 millimeter projector to view it, so we just put that off as something we were going to do at some point in the future. And then the flood came, and we got packaged and repackaged and repackaged. But when we get unpacked at the new location, we're going to find that again and borrow somebody's 16 millimeter projector and see what's actually on there. But it could very well be that show.
You can also very reasonably now have that transferred
Sure.
onto a CD.
Yeah, first we got to see what it is.
It'd be interesting also to see whether or not it's an actual filming of the concert or it's what's called a kinetoscope,
Right, yeah.
which is a filming of the TV
right,
screen.
Yeah, and I don't know.
One of the other things that's nice about the calendar is that
That became the roots are the Mohawk Valley Chorus.
Right.
It started with the Mohawk Mills Chorus.
Yeah.
And there's still a couple people alive who were on that show. Ralph Cook, for one.
We decided to stick with buildings again this year.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we don't want to be tight, we don't want the calendar to be typecast as some historical associations do. Whereas we're just interested in historic structures. In following years, it might be great places to eat in Amsterdam, or it might be sports, the history of sports in Amsterdam. Things that won't lend themselves so well to our annual tours, but are worth treating, and people are interested in. But there were so many buildings we couldn't get in last year that we decided to do one more historic buildings calendar. And in particular, the cover story is the Amsterdam Free Library. And in the middle of the calendar, in what Bob Cudmore calls the centerfold,
Here I am.
is a big write-up on the history of the library in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
So it's still only $12 like last year. Makes a great Christmas gift. And you can get it on the south side at Dolce's, at the Amsterdam Free Library on the north side, and also the Bookhound on Main Street, and Old Peddler's Wagon at Five Corners. And of course online at historicamsterdam.org if you're watching from out of town.
Yeah, I was wondering if this was in here, the commitment by the city of Amsterdam to provide $2,500 a year to support the library. Of course, back then, that was a big piece of change.
But technically, legally, that's all they were ever obligated to do.
Right.
Still.
Inflation was never a factor.
When Jerry and I did our
What happens if they stop? Is Carnegie taking the building back?
I don't know.
So that'd be an interesting
Wouldn't it? It'd be an
question.
interesting case. There's an old story about, and Jerry and I used this as a trivia question when we did our book. One of the questions we asked were, we asked things like, where did the bells of Amsterdam dance above the bells of the
Right.
Which of course is Henrietta and the trolley bar, which had a dance floor. But one question we came up with was, when we came to the library, which came first, the Scot or the Scotch? Because the story goes that after Carnegie agreed to make the donation of the building, and of course he was originally a Scotsman.
He was always a
And
Scotsman.
I think he died a Scotsman too.
But he said that, I'll agree, if you do two things, it has to be free and open to everyone, and the city has to make this agreement to support it. And so they took care of the first part by calling it the Amsterdam Free Library and chiseling that over the doorway. The second thing they had to do is they had to get the Common Council to agree, and the story goes that the way they did that was by taking them all out and getting them liquored up one night. And then they finally decided to support the library. So that was probably a good investment of library dollars.
Carnegie, I believe, built 2,500 libraries all over the United States
Yeah.
with his.
And this is an exceptional example. I think the one in Gloversville is
Isn't that a beautiful building?
it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
So if you'd like to get a calendar, get them because they go fast. Like I said, last year we sold out.
Wow.
And of course this year, another project we'll be working on is we're getting ready to do our annual tour, 6 new postcards and booklet. This year it'll be what we're calling West End Story.
Division Street really had some great buildings on it in
did.
the olden days. I'm looking at the Elks Club picture. Where are we? We're in July. The July centerfold is the Amsterdam Savings Bank, but the old Elks Club is right next to it. And looking at that, I am reminded of something that was posted on your Facebook Hal page this week, which was when the Yankees came to town in 1942. Do you believe that stash of stuff that Diane Smith is coming up with? It's
Endless. It's fantastic too.
Fantastic stuff. It may be the only movies of the Yankees coming to town, but I'll bet it isn't. Hopefully it'll cause some other people to look in their attics.
Yeah.
But of course, the one she sent to the two of us privately this week was especially moving because she's got video of the Company G guys leaving Amsterdam in 1940
Really?
at the train station.
Yeah.
And Art Carter is front and center in the first few shots, wearing his World War I veterans hat. What do they call those? Was it his cap?
Campaign hat?
Yeah, like the American Legion guys wear. What do you?
Glengarry.
Well, that's where it comes from originally. The Americans call them
Glengarry.
Yeah.
The wedge hat.
Yeah.
Or we would call them an American service garrison cap.
Okay.
And there's another name for him which I can't repeat.
Anyway, so he's clearly appearing both as a veteran and a mayor. I recognize some of the guys. There's a fairly good close-up of then First Lieutenant Charles de Groff, who kind of led them in the parade, but you can see he's clearly keeping discipline in the ranks as they're about to board the train. And very serious. Everybody looks so serious in that. I mean, they really wanted to look military. They're standing tall, erect, there's a brief shot of Bolsnapic, who was the first sergeant, who had given the pep talk before the Newt Rockney talk he gave to the troops before they marched out of the armory. So now we've got some interesting stuff. We got that the final photograph that Diane came up with that, right? Was that where that came from? The photograph of them sitting on the steps or standing on the steps?
I really don't remember right now.
I don't know where that, if it came from her, I don't know why necessarily she would have had a copy of that, but because nobody in her family was in that group. But it was a great picture.
Nice.
So that's just before they march off. I got some recorder photos of one has de Groff leading them down Bridge Street to Main Street, after they've crossed the bridge. And it's a great action shot because there's this little kid, I think in knickers, kind of running along beside them. And one of my friends, Frank Romeo, one of my high school classmates, gave me a picture of his father and his grandmother. His father saying goodbye to his grandmother before they left. And then there's this one. A lot of the pictures of Main Street parades were from the roof of the Hotel Griffin. I guess it must have had easy access.
Yeah.
That's and there's this shot from there as the troops are marching down Main Street. And it is wall-to-wall people as far as the eye can see. I mean, going back to St. Mary's Church, well, almost, because they actually started on Liberty Street, but just, 20 deep. Which makes the reports of there being 20,000 people seeing them off pretty accurate.
Yeah.
Wow. A big day in Amsterdam history. Nobody knew what they were going. Officially they were going for a year.
1 year. 1 year. That's all.
Yep.
I'll be home.
We'll train you.
One of the slang expressions among the National Guardsmen who went up at the time was Ohio, over the hill in October, which meant I'm getting out of here. Uncle Sam is going to release me in October of 41.
Yeah.
One vote in Congress kept him on duty. And so that's why the New York or 27th Division was sent right to the West Coast immediately after Pearl Harbor because they didn't know if the Japanese would be following up with an attack on the West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, they were sent overseas. First Division to go overseas, they ended up in the defense of Hawaii, and then from there to the rest of the Pacific campaign.
No, the Japs never got that close to Hawaii again, did they?
No, not really. I think there was a aborted attempt to bomb Hawaii by seaplane from French frigate Shoals that never worked out, and that was it.
Yeah. They had plans.
They had lots of plans. They had plans for attacking the Panama Canal. Planes launched from
I think
submarines.
Humphrey Bogart stopped that one, as I recall, and crossed the Pacific.
Yeah.
Single-handedly, just grabbed the BAR or something and shot down all the Japanese planes.
And then they did manage to attack Alaska, and
Attacking. Did you see that thing I sent you on the Lansing brothers?
no, I have not had a chance to catch up.
Well, let me tell you then.
Oh, wait a minute. Are we talking about the pilot?
Yeah.
Oh, good, because this is great stuff. I know, I haven't had a chance.
Well, it turned out that I had the information all along. You had given me the clip about the ship, the Lansing, being named after this guy. Well, I got the whole story. They were from here, raised here, went to school here, etc. And it's only when he went to service, he ended up getting married and settling somewhere else. But he was definitely an Amsterdam boy through and through. He went into service in the Navy in 1933 or 4. Yeah. He went in the reserve and then went on active duty in 34 full time. So when the war came around, just before the war, he had been aboard the Lexington for most of his Navy career, and he asked for a transfer to England before we're in the war, because his brother had joined the Canadian Army and was stationed in England at the time, and he wanted to be where his brother was, and so he, for a few months in 1941, he was in England, and they brought him back to assign him to duty on the West Coast, and he stops to see his mother on the way to the West Coast for a couple of days, and leaves there on December 6, 1941.
Right, and then he was assigned to Patrol Wing 4, I think it was.
Right, and as soon as he gets to San Diego, they send the group up to Alaska because the Japanese have taken over. What's the name of that?
Kiska and Atkins.
Kiska, yes, Kiska Island and the naval and the port there, and we're setting up a naval base. And this is really early, like June of 1942. He leads a dive bomb attack against the Japanese fleet single-handedly, I guess. And I don't know if he led it. He was in it, and he gets shot down. And I forget whether he did get a Silver Star. He got a commendation anyway.
I had to research it. Naming a destroyer.
Then his brother, when he hears of his death, volunteers for the Dieppe expedition. And so he is in that. He's with the Canadian Army, and this is the pre-D-Day invasion of France that turned into quite the disaster, and the brother is captured, and he's wounded and captured in prisoner of war. And what happened to him after that, I don't know, because the article I have is from like 43. And at that point, the woman she was a widow. The father had been the Jim Nikosha of his day. He ran a radio shop on Division Street. It wasn't a radio shack, but it was a radio shop. And he died like in 33, which was when, this one I can't remember his first name. William, was it?
Lansing?
Lansing, yeah. Whatever, yeah. That's when he goes in the Navy. So she only had the two sons and a daughter, and so she moved out. I don't know, Cortland or someplace somewhere in the western part of the state she was living at the time she gave the interview to the recorder. But,
thing I had not been able to figure out, again I haven't had a chance to go back to any of this lately, was he's described as a plane captain. Now, that can mean one of two things. A plane captain, often in the Navy at the time, meant that the enlisted man was in charge of the maintenance of the plane. So like a crew chief.
Well, he was in. I mean, I got the impression that his early career was as a mechanic.
Yeah.
But he's clearly flying the plane. He's the pilot of the plane that goes down.
And that's why I'm wondering if there may have been a misuse by the press of a term.
Yeah, I think it was like the captain of the ship isn't necessarily ranked a captain.
Right. Because also he served.
And it was the Navy.
Yeah. He served on the Lexington, which had a very famous squadron of all enlisted pilots. Because for a while there, the Navy wasn't clear whether all of its pilots should be commissioned officers, or some should be enlisted and some should be officers. Later on, they decided all pilots should be commissioned, but even well, they just thought they'd get a better candidate with a higher education level, and it was.
Plus, they paid them more.
Yeah, and it brought it into compliance with practices.
But George H.W. Bush, one of the youngest Navy pilots, there was the youngest Navy pilot in the war. He had not gone to college. He was 17 when he went in.
Yeah.
And he was, I think, 19 when he was shot down.
Well, Chuck Yeager starts out as a...
Well, Chuck Yeager never went to college. That's why he didn't get to go in the astronaut corps.
And initially, he comes in as he's trained as... the Air Force tries an enlisted pilot program for a while. And their solution is to create flying officers. So you're not really commissioned, but you're not enlisted either. It's very similar to when we had to deal with who would pilot helicopters. When we started developing in the Army, we decided, well, we didn't want to treat them like tank commanders and let them be enlisted, but we didn't want to have like a whole bunch of officers doing nothing but flying helicopters, so we made helicopter pilots warrant officers, generally.
So anyway, it's not entirely clear, but I think
Yeah.
in those early days of the war, I mean, it's like, Hassenfuss was supposed to be, he was a mechanic, he was an airplane mechanic, William Hassenfuss, and was killed at Hickam Field, Hawaii on December 7, 1941. But he had already been notified that they were reclassifying his position, so he was going to jump from a PFC to essentially sergeant rank,
Yeah.
a technical sergeant rank, not through promotion, through reclassification. And I think that they were probably still fiddling with that stuff. And
A lot of it.
anyway, I mean, I see no evidence in what I have that Sampson had acted, Lansing had acted as a pilot before that time. Maybe he had, but he wasn't. It doesn't appear to have been a pilot aboard the Lexington when he was there. I don't know.
No, but I do know also that Patrol 4, which he was assigned to, did have enlisted pilots. And so it's very interesting. The strangest thing about it all is this was sort of a stopgap where they sent these Catalina flying boats out, which were basically nothing but low and slow patrol craft, and they tried to figure out ways to bomb the Japanese. And so to take a huge flying boat and try to turn it into a dive bomber is madness.
But it's all they had.
That's all they had.
It's all they had, and now they're in occupying territorial United States.
Yeah. So they're out there attacking these Japanese ships, trying to dive bomb huge flying boats onto them, and that's when he was hit and the plane went down. I haven't seen his actual citation, but considering that they named the destroyer after him, it's probably.
I think it's in what I sent to you.
Okay, good.
Yeah, yeah, and he is so far as I know the only Amsterdamian to have a ship named after him, right?
Yes, the USS Amsterdam was named after the city, and the only Amsterdamian was Lansing,
Yeah,
as far as I know.
yeah.
But I'm always discovering something new. So.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's funny. We've been talking about this a long time. It was probably over a year since you first showed me that, and I was going through my piles of stuff I had printed out the other day, and there it is. There it is.
Yeah, it's amazing. The stuff that just creeps up. Somebody asked me the other day about.
So I'm going to treat him as one of the Amsterdam War dead, even though he wasn't living here at the time. So he goes in the next edition of my other book.
He's actually buried, I think, out in I think it's San Diego.
Yeah, out on the West Coast someplace. Yeah. Now, then I tracked down the ship. Believe it or not, it's still in existence. Despite everything that got scrapped after the war, it was recommissioned during the 50s, and served a variety of purposes, and then they sailed it to Bremerton, Washington in 1965, and it's still there in the reserve fleet. It was decommissioned in '65, but now supposedly
awaiting scrapping. Right?
Supposedly there's a new Lansing coming out in 2014 or 15 or something like that. It's online to be a submarine, but I think it's named after the city and not the previous ship.
Yes, I noticed that one. Yeah, that's the custom now with submarines. Well, let's kick off a fundraising drive, and we'll get the USS Lansing rehabbed and towed down and parked off a river link.
It was a destroyer escort, I believe, so it would fit. It would fit here. It would be the size of the Slater, I would assume.
Yeah,
probably the same class.
I'll have to check because I was involved in getting the Slater up here, and we can get the Slater to Albany by we can get the Lansing to.
Boy, but to tow it from Washington through the canal, the Panama Canal.
Actually, what they did with the Slater when she came across the Atlantic is, rather than tow her, they actually put her in a floating dry dock.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Picked her up. No, actually, I take that back. They actually lifted the whole thing onto a ship designed to carry small ships and sailed her across the Atlantic that way.
It's like the space shuttle going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Wow. Wow.
So wouldn't that be something?
Who knew?
Yeah,
Who knew?
be great.
So there it is. I mean, you know, chances of them ever using it again is probably pretty slim. I was surprised, really surprised, because somewhere along the line they began scuttling the reserve fleets. But I mean, it's designed to, you know, be back in action in 4 months or something. I think
Really?
I think that's the point of the reserve fleet.
Yeah, what they do is they seal them up and they pump special chemicals to hold down the corrosion. And then, yeah, in theory, you could, in an emergency, put one of these ships back into service. But what they would use it for
Who
nowadays,
knows?
you know, it's
Slow and old.
Now, I
Yeah.
thought, I remember years ago, I was in college visiting one of my friends downstate, and he took me to see the Liberty Ship Reserve Fleet in the Hudson. That was down around Bear Mountain somewhere, I
a
think.
little further north. So where was it exactly? Haverstraw Bay,
Yeah,
which is right below West Point,
yeah, yeah.
but above Bear Mountain.
Yeah, between Bear Mountain and West Point. Now, is that still there, or did they finally get rid
All
of all
gone.
them?
All gone. There's a wonderful little monument on the side of the road, but you miss it because the road winds there, and you're kind of like, let me not drive off the cliff. But they took two of the anchors from the old Liberty ships, and they put up a plaques indicating that's where the Maritime Reserve Fleet was. They had like 200 of them out there in the bay.
Now, Cy was on an escort carrier, the USS Marcus Island, and that was essentially a Liberty ship that was converted to aircraft.
First American escort carrier was the USS Long Island, which was a converted collier.
And that ship is where the Marine squadrons landed on Guadalcanal, which we talked about in the last hour.
Yeah.
It came off the USS Long Island.
And she proved the concept. The British had actually been experimenting with it, but it was the Long Island that made us come to realize that they called them escort carriers because their initial design was to be able to escort convoys, because once you got into what was called the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap, which I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but where land-based maritime patrol craft.
Well, that's some of our Greenland followers to explain that.
The U-boats didn't have to worry. They could operate on the surface. They could move with greater speed and agility. So the answer to this was the British tried to launch airplanes off merchant ships. That didn't work very well. So they came up with the idea of smaller carriers, no hangars, basically just a few airplanes, but they would be able to attack the U-boats in the middle of the ocean. And then we realized that not only could they do that, but they were also great for supporting amphibious landings.
Right, right.
And one of the greatest roles they played is during the entire wars as what we called jeep carriers, which is they, along with the fleet replenishment ships, the fleet oilers, they would escort the fleet, and the capital warships could stay out there pressing the Japanese and never had to return to port, because the replenishment ships and the jeep carriers would go back and get more planes, more gas,
Right.
and take it right out to the carriers. So
Yeah, their first, their first few missions when the ship was commissioned were carrying planes to different ports in the Pacific to just to get them out there.
Now, how long could a carrier stay out at sea?
Well, indefinitely, because they had the fuel ships following behind them. So I don't think he got off the ship for 2 years. Seriously.
unless you had to go in for an overhaul. The effect of the replenishment ships in World War II was almost as profound as the creation of the nuclear ships later on. In that, and actually, I take it even a step further, because even a nuclear ship will have to return to port because it will run out of food or other supplies. However, with the onboard replenishment, basically, the ship could stay out as long as its operating mechanisms didn't need to be overhauled, because they just kept bringing out all the supplies right to the ship. And so they were major unsung heroes of the Pacific War, in that they allowed us to keep the pressure on
And
the
there were
Japanese.
a lot of them. They were really churning those out after a while. When you think about the early days of the war, when all we had was the four big carriers, and they weren't all that big by modern standards. And then we ended up losing three of them in a relatively short period of time.
But shortly after that, the Essex class comes online, and that's like...
Right, and the new Lexington, and the new Yorktown, and,
Right.
and the new Enterprise. Well, that came later, but
And that's actually where the light cruiser USS Amsterdam, CL 101, was originally laid down as another hull number,
right,
but that hull number becomes a carrier.
right.
And
So,
they
as
had
a
to
matter of
create
fact, we
new
talked
one.
about that in the first hour, didn't we?
Yes, we did.
Before you got here, yeah.
Ah, I see.
How it ended up, where it ended up. They used the Bikini atomic bomb testing.
A lot of historic ships were lost to Bikini. But no, that was a fascinating story with...
That was a nice way to get rid of what was left of the Japanese Navy, however.
Actually, we didn't sink some of their submarines there. We actually took them and sank them purposely before the test to make sure that they were actually destroyed. Because the Russians were hitting us up. All right, you've had long enough. Now it's the time for us to take a look at those submarines. And these were the giant Japanese aircraft carrier submarines that were meant to attack the West Coast and Panama Canal. And we were no way were we going to let the Soviets see those. So they ended up getting scuttled. Whoops. Off the coast of Hawaii. And it was like, oh, sorry, guys.
Mistakes happen.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know. Somebody just left the plug out of the drain. And they went. That almost happened to me as a kid. I was on a tour of a Gatto class submarine that had been converted into a radar picket, and she was in Brooklyn Navy Yard, which was still active then, for a tour, open, for replenishment or something, and tours of Cub Scouts were being allowed aboard, and everything had do not touch signs on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Irresistible.
That's the first thing to touch.
Yeah.
So one of my fellow Cub Scouts, Rick, flooded out the whole control room.
Oh my God.
So we're scampering up the ladders, trying to get out while the few sailors on board are trying to keep this thing from sinking. At the I don't know which, he must have pulled like the main induction valve or something because water was coming in everywhere.
Now you may have some idea how I felt when we were aboard one of my uncle's guided missile frigates and standing in the war room with my 3-year-old Jamie bouncing around. I could just see him wiping Boston off the map,
Really.
from Newport. Oh,
That was the first time I was on a U.S. sub, and interesting. They used to have the Nautilus was on display up at the Groton Museum.
It's the first atomic submarine, right?
Right.
The Nautilus.
is that still alive?
Yeah, I think they had to take her for across to Electric Boat Division for refitting and cleaning up. Like they just took the Intrepid in New York across to have her hull scraped and brought her back, and it took them forever because they kept bottoming out in the mud and couldn't get her unplugged. The suction of the mud that had grown up around her at her berth in New York was so great. They took
Is that right?
6 tugs to finally break her free after a lot of other efforts.
Is it that shallow at that point? Wow.
You get a lot of accumulation there, and that's where the Snyder used to be. Where it used to be right next to her. And that's what I did is convince them that they didn't need to pay $100,000 a year to berth in the shadow of the Intrepid. They could come up here and get $100,000 from the state legislature instead.
Tax dollars at work.
Yeah. Of course, now that they're up and running, they no longer get a kick from the legislature. It's all supported by donations. But anyway, I think they took the Nautilus over for a refit. But it used to be, and I don't know if it's changed, that when you went aboard the Nautilus, you could see everything except the nuclear propulsion area. And I think it was at first it was for security reasons, and then later I think it was because of radiation.
Little leak.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Lord only knows.
Yeah.
It's a problem I ran in with the Air Force. I was looking for it's called a Beaumark missile. It was originally classified as unmanned fighter aircraft. But what it really is it's like a cruise missile. but it's designed to hit Soviet bombers in the 1950s. And we had a couple of bases in New York, primarily down at Suffolk Air Force Base, where these things would be launched at the Soviets if they came across the North Pole. And I had found what I thought was one, and the Air Force refused to let me have it. It was in an abandoned museum, because they said it was made with irradiated steel. So therefore it was a radiation hazard. And they insisted that they all be cut up and destroyed and buried. Except for the one in the Air Force Museum out in Ohio, of course. So it's like, oh, wait a minute, why do you guys have one and Cradle of Aviation Museum on Long Island can't have one? And they were like, well, because we're the Air Force. We know how to handle these things. And like,
Yeah.
I feel
You
bad.
got a Geiger County out front? I bet
Yeah.
you not. Yeah. Wow. Well, what you don't know won't hurt you, right? Wow.
But it's amazing the stories that just come out of nowhere, that you don't even know about or you've forgotten about. The other day, somebody asked me, they had been to the racing museum, the automotive museum in Saratoga, and there's some kind of map display that shows, here are the places that were early car manufacturers. It wasn't before it was all Detroit.
Mhm.
And in order to be a car manufacturer, you had to qualify as 5 or more cars per year being manufactured back in those days. So a lot of them were handmade, and we're talking about like 1898, 1901.
Yeah, right.
And there's a star in Amsterdam. So somebody, as I'm making my tour downtown, somebody comes up to me and says, what car was made in Amsterdam in 1903, 04? So I had done some research on this once before, and it came to me, that was the Terwilliger Empire steamer car.
Wow.
But I had no real information on it, so I started to dig around. I called up Jerry Snyder, because I did have information in the file in the office. Terwilliger was practically a handmade car. They made like 5 a year. They had these incredible, they called them artillery wheels, because they were like tubular steel spokes, and then the rubber. And because they were steam cars, they had a very unusual design. Like in the early prototypes, you actually entered from the back of the car instead of from the sides, like in a modern car. And of course, all the equipment was different.
Yeah.
Especially on a steamer, I would think.
Yeah. Gauges for water temperature, but
Water pressure.
What'd they
steam
fuel it
pressure.
with? Wood or coal? Or neither?
Actually, they used some gasoline to
Really?
fire up the boiler.
Whoa.
Yeah. And
That sounds pretty
Well, I feel safe,
explosive.
Yeah.
yeah, and it's very unusual because, like, the engines the pistons are described as dual piston heads opposing each other horizontally, located below the driver's compartment. Can you imagine that? Your cylinder head sticking out?
Blow a gasket.
But the museum up there had pictures of all these cars, but no picture of a Terwilliger Empire. In essence, they had said,
I'm sure Jerry can find one buried in the Adirondack woods somewhere.
he did. He didn't find it. He didn't find an Empire steamer car, but Jerry found an advertisement in a New York paper. It's actually for the equivalent of the Madison Square Garden auto show for like 1905, and it's an ad for the Terwilliger Empire steamer car, and it's actually got a picture of the refined model. And this is the only known picture I know of this car that was made. Except that Jerry and I have a theory that there's a picture of the antlers,
With one of those in it.
one of those in there, but the quality of the resolution, blowing it up is so poor, we can't tell if it's this.
Oh, well, let me look at this old picture of Main Street. Maybe somebody's driving one, or you don't even know it. Nah, it's a little later.
Too late.
Well, there's still horses and wagons in this
Yeah.
picture.
So you just never know. I mean, the stuff that people bring in the office. It's been a little difficult doing history lately because of everything else, but
How's everything else going?
just it's just one thing after another. I've got projects in various stages all over the place, but I'm feeling optimistic. I think it's good. That might be the Leander's pictures that we were talking about, but I think that one's a little too old. I think those are basically some Fords.
Yeah, we're looking at the Antlers Clubhouse. Now, during the time frame of this photograph of the Antlers Clubhouse, it would have been during Prohibition, I would think.
Prohibition, or a little earlier, I thought.
Well, maybe it is a little earlier. Anyway, mine is a Prohibition story. My father-in-law used to run liquor up to the Antlers Country Club, and no one ever got arrested for violating Prohibition when you were delivering to the country club.
Well, that's an interesting. There's two interesting things about that tie-in. One was I was talking to somebody else the other day about gambling in Amsterdam.
What?
Whoa,
Yeah.
never.
Why?
Yeah.
Well, this must be an old story.
And this person seemed to be surprised that we had a police chief that was busted for having gambling records in his car. And I was like, no.
Somebody had to keep them.
Yeah,
They're
right.
safe with him.
Yeah.
And I said, and I told him the shoe store, the famous shoe store story.
Right, from the SIC investigation.
Yeah, where the guy comes in with the shoes and says,
Yeah, what am I going to do with these?
So they have to send them out to a real
So I
shoe
just
store.
sent them out the real shoe repair shop.
But I remember reading some old recorder articles where the chief of the Amsterdam Police Department is in essence complaining and apologizing to the people of Amsterdam after the state police come in and conduct this huge raid. And in essence, he says, well, what do you expect from me? They didn't tell me they were coming. In other words, if they had told me, I would have tipped you all off.
You know, because we were related, Johnny DiLorenzo, and he's over on Union Street, and he always kept all his his portion of the money in his house. And he'd gotten robbed 3 different times of over $30,000 a pop.
He's when he had the secret room, right?
Yes, he did.
Yeah.
Everybody knew about it. But the funny thing in the family is, the other part of the family is Vic Stark, who was a detective on the police department. So every year when we'd have the family get together up at Galway Lake, Johnny would be there with Vic, and they'd be chatting very cordially, of course, and who knows who passed information back and forth. It used to be down here at the bottom of Northampton and Guy Park Avenue, a little candy store where de Blasio's insurance agency is. And I used to live up on the Heights. And I'd go down once in a while to get something from the store. And I asked my dad, I said, you know, I never see anybody in there. They got 3 stools at the counter and 3 cans of soup on the shelf, but I've never seen anybody in there. He said, well, next time you go down, just don't speak very much and just listen and tell me what you hear. Well, I went down a couple days later and came back and said, yeah, I heard a whole lot of people talking. He says, well, in Amsterdam, how it is each one of these little moms and pop stores are specialty stores. Because that one there is where they play craps. You go down on Division Street,
You play poker.
they play poker. Okay? Everyone, and it was everybody. I went out with a girl who lived on West Main Street, and every day at 3 o'clock, her grandma would bang up with the broom on the bottom, the ceiling there for upstairs to hear to find out what the number was. Because every used to play, you know, a nickel or a dime number. And Vic Stark told us one time at the family gathering, he says, the worst thing that ever happened to the city of Amsterdam is when they made
legalized gambling.
Legalized gambling, he says, because we don't get our bonuses anymore. Okay, because they go around and they would do a token raid here or there, you know, various times a year, and that's how the money that was confiscated was passed out to the police officers as their bonuses. But they didn't get that anymore because the bookies all kind of disappeared, more or less.
Yeah.
Less than more, but
Yeah,
Amsterdam was notorious.
I used to date a girl when she was very young, her father used to give her the betting slips, and the deal was the kids got all excited because they'd take them down to the candy shop and they'd hand them in and they'd get a little piece of candy or
Well,
something.
you know, the joke when we were kids was if you wanted to you want to know where the gambling places were in Amsterdam, you look in the telephone directory under confectionery store.
Yeah.
Nobody could make a living running a real confectionery store, so they'd have the penny candy, and you'd go in there. But the penny candy was just the front for the
back
whatever
rooms.
was going on in the back room.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had an interesting talk with the owner of Dudka's Garage over on Carmichael, and he was asking me about this. Apparently, there's this tunnel that runs out up into the garage from south to north, and he was wondering, could this have gone back to, like, escaping from the Indians in the old days? And I told him, well, I have seen colonial structures like that did have those things, and even in this area. But I said, no, but basically that building below you was a brewery.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Right.
And your garage was a trucking company. So I'm much more likely to believe that near beer was going out the front door.
Is the tunnel still there, you mean?
He was a little vague about that, but he was like,
Gary's a little vague on a lot
Yeah.
of stuff, yeah.
but he was like, and he was like, and so I said, no, it's much more likely that near beer was going out the front door and real beer was going out through the tunnel to the trucking company. Until finally the brewery got shut down. There's a lot of stories, and you just never know what's going to walk in the door next.
Yeah.
Yeah, the untold stories are the best ones.
And if you talk about enough things, something's going to pop about something that's, oh, you know what?
Yeah.
And that's how you get it. That's what I think the best thing about Facebook is. So he makes a comment about something.
Well,
else,
that's
and
right.
then the branches that go out.
And as we dig deeper into Diane Smith's trunk, it's going to cause other people to find other things. And
Sure, and that's good.
well, when I posted that photograph of my great-great-grandfather a couple of weeks ago, who died in 1879. Same guy was in that other picture I posted with you, with the three of them at the Schuler Spring Shop, and it was probably taken just about the same time, a portrait of him, and then that drew a little attention because actually an awful lot of people are descended from this guy, and then somebody asked whether there are pictures of my great grandparents, who were his son and his wife, and I said, no, I don't have one, but I know who does, and I listed my two Facebook friends who I knew had pictures of them, and that's how my second cousin Johnny Perkins came up with my great grandpa. I'd never seen the picture. I had seen a couple of pictures of him. Never seen a single picture of my great grandmother. And here it is, a nice full portrait. It may have been their wedding portrait, although she's dressed in black, it appears. But that doesn't mean it's not their wedding portrait. As a matter of fact, where's that? Oh, my wife took it down. We got a picture of us, one of these antique pictures we had taken on our 10th anniversary, where me sitting down and her standing up. This picture's the same thing.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. I got to put them side by side, the two merry-goings.
You didn't have to stand there with a brace on the back of your neck for 10 minutes while the plate developed. But this stuff goes, actually, this kind of ties into what I do with economic development now and then. This branch in sequels, one thing leads to another. You can't imagine. I'll be talking to somebody and I'll get a lead, and that lead will work or not, and then they'll give me another lead that goes to another thing. And the other thing is that people really like the history here, particularly when I'm out talking to some of the business owners and the manufacturers. I walked into one the other day, and I knew this was going to be a pretty difficult interview, and that he was turned off by the city long before I got there. So he was basically going to be looking at me like, what the hell I want to talk to you about? So I'm admiring. He's got these pictures of his factory in its former incarnations up above the receptionist desk, and one of them says, courtesy of Arcadia Publications, read Amsterdam, a postcard history by Schneider and von Hasselt. But they got it printed right over the picture, kind of it's cheesy. So he walks out, and I said, would you like a better copy of that? I can get that for you. And he's like, yeah. And he says, you know what else? I've always looked for, there's a picture of my place in the 1950s that I can't. And I said, no problem, I'll get it for you. So I call up a couple of people, and sure enough, I get the picture. So the next time I walk in the door, it's like Oh, here are those two pictures you wanted. Now let's talk some business.
There
So
you go.
it makes
Good segue.
makes a great entryway. Yeah, it does.
It's got to be hard for them to turn you down after that.
Well, I wouldn't go that far. We'll see. I hope.
Yeah. Well, you stop talking. This is why we have you on, so we don't have to do anything. Is it about time here? Or
It's 5 after.
what time did we start?
About quarter after the last one.
All right, so we got a little time. You got time?
I got a few minutes. I gotta
All right.
go to work.
Okay. Well, this tunnel thing intrigues me. Did you ever hear about the cave at Harmon's Field?
Oh.
I think Gavin told me about that.
No, I think we did this early on in our,
Oh yeah, did we discuss this
Association.
one time?
yeah.
Yeah, then maybe that's it.
Yeah, because we were talking about the trolley tracks up there.
Yeah. Those went down about the trestle went down about 1941, I think, or somewhere thereabouts.
Yeah.
But
The only tracks that were left were
Yeah.
ones up on top that went into Dr. Selbert's place.
I can tell you an interesting story about something that did come up recently, and this is, again, history and how it ties to economics and all that, and business. Excuse me, for 2 years now, I've been working with the engineering firm that has got the contract to do the pedestrian bridge. And they've been asking me for guidance on, what historic themes, how should we display the history of Amsterdam on the bridge? And I was like, first of all, don't try to make an outdoor museum. We already got a museum in this town. We don't need an outdoor museum. So I'm like, sometimes less is more. But I was trying to give them some ideas. But they just didn't seem to get it, as much as I would boil it down. So they went out and they hired a top-flight historical consultant.
I thought you were a top
Yeah.
flight historical consultant.
So the first thing she does,
It calls you.
she calls me.
Of course.
So I give her the talk, and I'm like, some key concepts, some things that, like, for example, at the open hearing, Maria Riccio Bryce talked about the concept of Amsterdam as home. We all came from somewhere else. We chose to come here, stay here, bring up our families here, so on. I talked to her also about the idea of Amsterdam as a city of neighborhoods. It's a small city, but it's got that big city feel, and that you've got very different.
Very distinctive
Yeah,
neighborhoods.
absolutely. So she was like, she went back and she told them that, which I told them like 2 years ago, and they were like, gotta have more on that right now. So she said, she calls me back. She says, how do I do that? I said, well, the book Jerry and I did is organized by neighborhood. So what she does is she gets the book, splits it open, takes the chapters, and hands it to them. This is called Market Hill. This is the East End. And they're like, thank you.
And she's getting paid for this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the nature of business sometimes.
Oh yeah.
When I was a
You're
consultant,
the local guy. What could you possibly know?
absolutely.
Not in my backyard.
Said, well, perceptions are very important. And people tend to think that,
That's why Duke does so well going down to Hudson. If he did his consulting here in Amsterdam, they say, well, what the hell do you know?
That's right. You gotta be from someplace else.
As long as you're from someplace else, then you're an expert.
it's like an old Carly Simon song or something. It's been there in your backyard all the time, but you just haven't been paying attention to it. It's amazing.
Wow.
So, but things I think are looking up. It's going to take a while, but have you been downtown lately?
No, actually. I have hardly been out of the house lately.
One of the things you guys should do when you get a chance is, I know people are staying away from it because, one, the facade is busted, and we're trying to help them get that fixed.
The pool hall.
The
you're
pool
saying.
hall. Well, we got to stop calling it the pool hall or the billiards place, because that still goes on in the back. But the front, which had basically had been just a sort of a odd utility, space, has been turned into a really nice upscale bar. In fact,
Really?
yeah, every time I go there, I like to sit by the door, because then I watch the older Amsterdamians come in, and the first thing I hear them say to, I can't believe this place is in Amsterdam. And it really does look like
That sounds like something Cudmore would say.
What's the name of the bar?
Sharpshooters. And it looks like a nice, upscale, quieter, outer borough New York bar. I mean, it's got like a rectangular bar. It's got a DJ booth. It's got a dance floor. It's got a little stage, live music.
Probably more red carpet than Topaz.
Oh, well, that's a flash from the past.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about this place is, and I picked this up not from the owner but from the other businessmen on the street, is that they keep the riffraff out. They're not appealing to like bikers and troublemakers. They actually have a bounce in
Where are
it.
we gonna go?
I don't know.
I went in there I'll give you an example. I went in there one
Could we
night.
go in with you? They'll let us in then.
Yeah. Well, they have to show ID, but.
Yeah.
They
And cover up the
normally-
tattoos, I guess.
But it's an old bar kind of rule of thumb. Women don't go places where they feel any kind of uncomfortable feeling. And I went in there, and there were, middle-aged women sitting and having a drink.
Yeah?
So it must be true what the other owners on the street are saying, which is they're very careful about who they let in. And when I was down there getting ready for the winter mixer a couple of nights, the place was pretty busy. But nobody seems to know about it.
But first I've heard of it.
Yeah, see? And one of the reasons is the guy who owns it, and he just put a huge amount of money in rebuilding it, is then that accident happened on the front. There was actually wind damage. And what happened is his insurance company said, well, it wasn't wind damage, it was water damage. And,
Oh, really? Well, the fact that it was a pretty heavy wind at the time had nothing to do with it, huh?
So
Yeah.
they're trying to stiff him, and we're trying to help him figure out either less expensive ways to do it or coming up with some kind of bridging loan or low-cost loan. Because, people look at that place and say, oh, I guess they failed.
Yeah.
I guess another Amsterdam business went belly up, when in fact it's actually growing in there and it's improving the whole street, except for the facade. So if you do get a chance, you should check that out. I had a very nice conversation with Mr. Tessero the other day, and he is proceeding to have the elevator fixed. And,
Really?
Yes. In fact, when I got a tour of the building. It wasn't Mr. Tessero who took me on the tour, it was his grandson. And you could see where they've been working on the elevator. In fact,
John?
Yeah, John.
The third, fourth.
And the elder Mr. Tessero told me that they had to buy a whole new car, which should be in about 2-3 weeks. His plans for developing the first couple of floors. We talked about some possible mutual plans for developing the bottom floor. And then we shook hands on an agreement that he's going to allow the city to use the parking lot next to it as a municipal lot, as long as we cover him on the insurance. Because one of the things I keep hearing from the merchants down there is that the parking on Main Street is driving away business.
Not very good.
It's not very good, and it makes people feel like, gee, I don't know if I want to try to stop here. And that if they could have off-street parking, it would help businesses and bring new businesses in.
Yeah, we've been through that about every generation. I was going to say the Holiday Inn, whatever that hotel is on Market Street, America's Best Value Inn. That was the West Side parking lot when we were kids, and the big parking lot on the Grove Street side of the mall was the East Municipal parking lot.
And you had the parking lot.
And of course, when the mall opened, all the parking lots at the mall, the upper one and the parking garage, were owned by the city. And so that took care of the downtown parking. But then the city just actually gave it away because they didn't want to maintain the parking garage.
We've got some longer range plans that are starting to form up on how to deal with downtown and parking after we get more businesses in here. But this should be a nice chance for a breather to give us a little time to put some more things in place. So, I'm cautiously optimistic on this and several other fronts.
Good deal.
It's time. Okay. a most enlightening hour. Gavin and I didn't have to talk at all, which is good. Which is why we have this guy come on only when he's sick and can't talk. But
Right.
nevertheless, come back when you're healthy sometime.
Which probably we never.
We'll talk a little more. All right. Special guest, Robert Van Hasselm. Gavin Murdoch. I'm Bob Going, and we'll be back next week, maybe, probably, I think, right?
We have a different location. next
Special
week.
Christmas store?
So your dad's book is coming too,
What's that?
right?
Down at our place
Oh, so you're not there.
Oh.
next week. Remember, we were talking about different locations?
Oh, yeah, maybe. We'll be back somewhere next week with more of The Show with No Name.